Happy Pride, everyone. Devin Haru for CBC Sports, a special Pride panel conversation. So looking forward to this. I'll introduce the panelists in a second. A little bit about me. I'm a reporter with CBC Sports. Born and raised in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, came out very publicly in a written article as a sports editor at the University of Saskatchewan newspaper. I think it was about 14 years ago right now, and it's been quite a journey ever since. Really an honor and a privilege to be doing this work, and an honor and a privilege to be joined by our three panelists here tonight as we get into the issues. It is Pride Month, and let's introduce the panelists. First of all, a friend and a colleague at CBC Sports, Anastasias, a two-time Olympian, a Team Canada speed skater, came out very publicly in 2014, just before the Sochi Olympics. It was in direct response to Russia's controversial laws on homophobia. She is the host of the CBC podcast, Player's Own Voice. Take a listen to it. A lot of fascinating and compelling conversations around athletes and their journey to where they got to. And Anastasia has been a guest speaker and a great advocate for equality in sport, regardless of gender or orientation. So thank you, Anastasia, for being with us.
Thank you, Devin.
Erin McLeod has been a goalkeeper for Canada's national women's team for nearly 2 decades. If you didn't know it, where have you been? She started in 2012.
4 FIFA World Cups.
2 Olympics, including, Erin, that riveting bronze medal win in London in 2012. What a journey that was. I'm hoping we can get into that a bit. Came out in 2014 and is currently playing with the Orlando Pride of the National Women's Soccer League. Erin, so grateful for you being with us today.
Thank you so much.
Finally, Wade Davis, a former NFL player, came out in 2012, a writer, an educator, a keynote speaker. Check out his TED Talks. They'll give you something to think about for days. An inclusion consultant for coaches and players. Like I said, a public speaker, and really an advocate for all members of the LGBTQ plus community in sport. Like I said, came out in 2012, a member of several national and international advisory boards regarding diversity, inclusion, including a member of You Can Play. Wade, good to see you. It is Pride Month. Here in Toronto, where I am, we'd be getting ready for a Pride parade. We'd be seeing rainbow flags all over the city. The pandemic, I'd probably be picking out my outfit for the parade. We'd be getting ready to celebrate. This is a different time. Something different is happening. We're having tougher conversations than we've ever had. We're in the midst of weeks and weeks of protests in the United States and Canada in the wake of the killing of George Floyd. Social issues are being brought to the forefront, and there's nowhere to turn. And so, Wade, let's start right there. You're a Black man, gay, former NFL player in America. What have you been thinking about these last few weeks?
Wow, that's a big question. What I've been thinking a lot about is how do I use my power, right? Like my social capital, my economic capital, to make sure that I am supporting, right, who are really pushing the conversation, who are risking not just their safety, but their lives and their freedom, right? To not just change the United States, but to change our entire world. And I've been really reflecting on all of the reading that I've done, whether it was from Black women, from feminist leaders, and to really try to interrogate my own BS, right? I think it's very easy to sit on the sidelines and say what you think and say what you like and say what you support, but what is our role as individuals to constantly interrogate our own power and to interrogate our role in the continuation of these systems of oppression. So I've been really interrogating, like, how am I still, even though I attempt to be the best advocate I can be, how am I still complicit in maintaining these structures that oppress trans women of color, right? That oppress women, even though I'm a Black, great privilege and access and all of those things. So I'm really trying to stay in a space of self-reflexivity instead of pointing the finger outwards, I'm trying to really point the finger at myself and understand what more I can do.
Always one to be learning and to be thoughtful about things, Wade. Thank you for that. Aaron, I'll ask you the same question. You know, when we reflect on Pride Month and the movement that is Pride, we think about its early days, the Stonewall Riots and the intersectionality between all of these issues. I wonder what conversations you're having, Aaron.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting time. As a team, not long ago, we visited the Orlando nightclub, you know, where there were a number of people murdered and shot to death. And weeks before that, we marched in the Black Lives Matter protest downtown. And I think similarly, you know, for so long, you know, I've been proud of not being racist, but now I know that's not enough as a white person. I'm finally educating myself. You know, I'm reading, I'm watching different films. I think it's about being anti-racist. And so I'm getting an education, but more than that, what I admire about the Black Lives Matter movement is realizing that you're not doing enough and what areas need to be attacked, and also speaking to the transgender community as a community that needs support and needs people from the rest of the LGBTQ plus you know, community to stand up for them. So I think just getting an education and kind of starting to learn a little bit more, but realizing it's not enough to just sit on the sidelines anymore.
Thank you so much for that, Aaron. Anastasia, to you, you and I, in preparation for this conversation, have had a lot of tough conversations. I wonder what you're thinking about today.
I think Pride 2020 is going to be one of the most important prides in our 51 years since Stonewall, to be honest, because it is so uncomfortable and we are having these difficult conversations and we're uncomfortable with ourselves. I mean, we just are not having, you know, celebratory parades and going to patios and being proud of ourselves, which is wonderful. But we're looking at what we define as diversity and how we can actually expand that definition and what we can do to be better. And I think I have to believe that that's going to move the needle in a way that we haven't seen in the last 50 years.
Thank you for that, Anastasia. I think that sets the stage nicely for this conversation. We want to be bold. We want to push people to think about this, and I think we have the right people for that. Let's get into this issue of coming out stories. We all have our own individual coming out story and process and everything that led to that moment where we felt we finally needed to speak out. It's fascinating as a reporter, every time you guys I write about or report about athlete in high performance or in a pro league, maybe not so much in a pro league, we'll get to that in a bit. But when we tell these coming out stories, my inbox is inundated with people saying, why does this matter? Why do I care? Why is this important? And so maybe Aaron, why don't we start with you? Why does this matter? These coming out stories and sharing them still today in 2020?
I mean, I think it comes down to a lot of things, but I think for me, you know, as an athlete and as a high performer, I think at the end of the day, things that are important are success and life fulfillment. And, you know, as an athlete and someone who is always looking for another edge, I do a lot of research when it comes to success. And I think, you know, it sums up, I saw this one article about a rat put in a maze with a cheese at the end, and there's a complicated maze, and then there's another rat, same maze, cheese at the end, and there's a cat like on the outside of the maze. And literally the efficiency of the brain of that rat getting to the end, I mean, it was like half, you know what I mean? And what it made me think, like, and the same goes for bullying, you know, you have kids who are geniuses, actually measured geniuses, and they are dropping out of school because they're getting bullied. So same in any type of high performance environment. The moment that you don't feel safe, the moment that you don't feel protected by the people around you, how you perform, your efficiency just drops. So I think, yeah, I mean, I think right now, like the more that we can do to kind of, for me anyway, being safe and being surrounded by people who I know are comfortable with who I am and vice versa, that has been a huge part of my career and why I've always felt so safe. I mean, I remember John Herdman came on board and almost right away said, you know, your girlfriends, your boyfriends, your significant others. And immediately I knew it was a safe place and somewhere where I could thrive because I didn't have to hide part of who I was.
I want to pick up on that, and then I'll get to Anastasia and Wade. But Aaron, that idea, I think we always have our antennae up to hear things like that. You know, where we can find allies, where we can feel we can be a little more authentic. So when you heard the coach of the team say, girlfriend, boyfriend, whomever you want to love, those things immediately, words matter. Little things like that matter, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I got an email the other day from campaign, and at the bottom of it, you know, you have your email signature, and the woman put her name, and then she put her preferred pronouns, she, her, hers. And the next day I changed mine, because I was like, immediately anyone in the LGBTQ plus community knows it's a safe space where they can be who they want to be, who they express themselves to be. So definitely language, I think, is absolutely everything.
Wade, you have been so vulnerable about your mask of masculinity and this false notion that masculinity was going to bring you all these things, but the very thing you wanted, freedom, it was never going to bring you. What was the cost of wearing a mask for so many years?
Wow. I thought about this question a lot. I would say the cost was the loss of self, right? Like the loss of the opportunity to get to question who I was, who I wanted to be, because I so deeply believed that who I knew that I was on the inside would not be loved, would not be accepted, right? And if I showed who I was, that my levels of safety would be less and less. So part of my responsibility now is to ask myself all of those questions that I was afraid to ask when I was younger, and to ask others those questions also. One of the things that I think that that we as humans, to take everything at face value, right? Like, I don't know how it is in Canada, but in America, you're given these tests that you actually have to pick A, B, C, or D, right? But my partner, he grew up in France, and he says that he was never given a multiple choice test his entire life until he came to America. Right. And what that let me know is, like, in France, they're actually teaching them to think. Whereas in America, like, we're teaching folks how to memorize, right? But to never actually interrogate what those questions are being asked, and what questions should we be asking of ourselves. And I think when I think of the idea of coming out, and to be frank, like, I actually don't even use the language of coming out. Right, because when I interrogate the word, right, it connotes that LGBTQ plus folks weren't already visible, right? Like, we were already here. What was true is that the world wasn't safe enough for us to invite the world in, as Darnell Moore says, to what's happening into our interior lives, right? And when you use the language of coming out, what straight people has done with that term is they've put us in this proverbial closet. And we're human beings. We're not smelly shoes or wire hangers, right? Or anything. Like, we're human beings. So the idea of inviting in means that I actually have an interrogation of the status quo, to say that you weren't worthy by your actions, by your laws, by your policies, for me to invite you into what was happening into my life. And until you showed up as more worthy by your actions and your behaviors, then I will invite you in until what's happening into my interior life. Because anything before that means that I would have to take a leap and trust you. But everything that you showed me before I was 28 years old said that to be Black, to be gay, would to be in danger.
I want to pick up on the questions that you were asking yourself. When you were in those NFL locker rooms, what was stopping you from authentically asking those questions? And how do we create an atmosphere now that we know better, so that people can think about those questions in a really healthy space?
You know, unfortunately, like, as a boy, you grow up being socialized to believe that being a man means to distance yourself from anything feminine. And that means that you learn to value this idea of masculinity that is incomplete, right? We know that there are masculinities with an S, right? And there isn't one type of masculinity, but you learn that there is only one type, or very few types. So what I had to really do is unlearn this idea that being a man did not mean that I had to separate myself from anything that was feminine, right? So those were the the simple type of questions. But what I was really afraid of was that my teammates, my brothers, my coaches who were father figures, they wouldn't love me, because everything that they had showed me prior to that moment said that they wouldn't love me. I never had a coach that actually said, whether I was in middle school, high school, college, or other pros, that said, if you identify as gay, I will still love you. I will still embrace you, and your teammates will do the same. And because those types of models or symbols did not exist, I made the assumption that they were just like everyone else. Yeah.
Thoughtful, Wade. Thank you for that. Anastasia, your own words, you wrote in an article that it makes you embarrassed and ashamed to admit that you didn't want to be gay. You were born and raised in a very conservative Catholic family in Alberta. When you reflect on that, and when you hear this idea of being embarrassed and ashamed of being gay, your own words, what do you think of now? What do you wish you could have told yourself when you were going through those feelings?
I mean, it's very uncomfortable to hear that, because I'm ashamed that I felt that way, but I still believe that there's power in admitting to those feelings, because I don't want to devalue anyone else's struggle to learning how to accept and love and be proud of themselves, because it took me so long. My parents are the most supportive parents you could ever find. And I think that there is sometimes this misconception that silence is equated to acceptance. And just in speed skating, all of my friends, all of my teammates, all of my competitors, I think there was just a real silence. Like, no one knew how to have this conversation. No one knew what your orientation, what that meant to be an athlete and to be gay. And I mean, it's difficult for me to hear those words back, you know, saying I was ashamed and I didn't want to be gay, but I also want to share that story so anyone struggling knows that it's okay to feel that way, and knows that it will get better. It will get better. But, you know, it also is a wake-up call to the people around us. Any allies, you know, you have to have this conversation. We have to continue the conversation, because it's still an issue and kids are still taking their lives. You only have to look at the disproportionate LGBTQ homelessness rates and suicide rates to know that this is still a massive issue within sport and just in society.
Let's pick up on that right there, Anastasia. I think this is an important part of the conversation. We're going to have a lot of allies out there who are wondering how to have these conversations. How many times have we had people in our lives say, well, I didn't want to offend you. I didn't want to say the wrong thing. Walking on eggshells. You talk about the silence. You talk about the tough conversations with your parents. Let's get into it, all three of us, starting with you, Anastasia, about what sort of tips and thoughtful advice and all of these sorts of things we can offer to our allies, whether it be issues of racism, misogyny, sexism, homophobia. How do we create this space where these conversations can happen, where it isn't about being offended? And let's face it, some people are always going to be offended, but what can we do to further the conversation?
Well, I'm going to throw it also to Aaron and Wade, because I personally, I mean, on one respect, I see, you know, tremendous value in having a very deep line in the stand and saying that's right and that's wrong. But I'm starting to get a little bit frustrated with cancel culture, because it's just made people so timid to start a conversation that they're not educated about, or they might say the wrong thing. Of course, there's a difference between ignorance and arrogance and being bigoted or racist or homophobic or transphobic. But if you're truly wanting to be an ally, you know, do a little bit of research. We all have Google. Like, it's not that hard, but also come to it with an open heart. And I have to believe, at least, and maybe this is my own privilege, but if someone truly comes to me and is struggling to have that conversation, I want to take them with the wrong thing. You know, okay, that's a learning moment. Let's dissect it and let's move on and try and progress. What do you guys think? I mean, I'm always like, is that too edgy for me to say I don't like cancel culture? But in some respects, I do think it's hindering progress.
Yeah, so I want to say two quick things. One, to your comment about you hating yourself, I hated myself too. But what I've learned is that wasn't a refutation of me. That was a criticism of the world. Like, anytime you grow up hating yourself, that means that the world around you has created the conditions for you to do that. So I actually think that owning that says nothing about you and everything about the world outside of us, right? Because when kids grow up loving themselves, that meant that they had an environment, a community that loved them first, right? So I just wanted to name that. When it comes to allies, and I'll speak to the cancel culture in a second, the number one job of an ally is to first interrogate yourself, right? So before you become interested in being an ally for a Black person, you've got to interrogate, what does it mean to be white? Before you want to be an ally LGBT, what does it mean for you to be cis? And what does it mean for you to be heterosexual? Like I am disinterested in people trying to advocate for me before they've actually answered some really hard questions for themselves. Because once you realize that racism hurts white people too, then you no longer are my ally, you're my accomplice, you're my solidarity partner. When folks who are heterosexual realize that homophobia, transphobia, and sexism hurts them also, it's a different level of engagement. It becomes deeply personal, right? And to the cancel culture piece, I'm not a believer in cancel culture either, because if that was the case, all of us would be canceled at some point. But what I think the ask of people is that if you make a mistake, that you show up with humility. You don't offer an apology that starts with the word if I've hurt you, right? Like that's not an apology, right? And 3, you understand that is your job if you have certain levels of power and privilege, is to take risk, right? Because to be a trans woman of color is to live your life in a space of risk. And no one deserves that level of innocence that they can advocate on behalf of someone else and not have to take any risk also. So if you get called out for being racist, homophobic, transphobic, sexist, or what have you, go thank you. You've just given me a real gift, and I will come back tomorrow after I've interrogated what I've learned. Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with everything that you guys are saying. My mind is going like this, but I'm just trying to think of some of the recent conversations that I've had. And especially with the Black Lives Matter movement right now, a lot of girls on my team are Black, and I've just been very upfront, and I'm talking about the books that I'm reading, and I just try and start a conversation in the most innocent way because I just want to talk about it. And eventually it kind of goes, they know if I've started it. I think it's, I want to talk about it, and it's something that I, don't have an understanding of. Maybe I never will, but it's about having the conversations. And I think similarly with allies in the LGBTQ community, it's the same thing. If anyone even opens a conversation, and I think that there's so much power in just saying I don't really know, just kind of admitting and being vulnerable and saying that you understand, or just kind of being open, kind of allows you to just have the conversation and to be educated, and just admitting that you don't know. I mean, so much of this just simply comes down to ignorance and just, not knowing, not being in someone else's shoes, and not that you can ever be in someone else's shoes, but just have an understanding or their thought process, or, systemic racism and all these things. It's just about sitting down and saying, okay, I don't know, I'm going to learn, and then look to the people around you for advice.
Learning a lot from you guys. Thoughtful stuff. Thank you. Aaron, I want to stick with you. I want to talk about pro sports, performative activism, all of the statements we're seeing come out from all of the leagues, all of the teams. They're posting these things in light of all of this. We see the flags every June in corporations. I don't have to tell you about this. We've had a lot of conversation around looking for pro athletes to come out in the big 4 leagues. And I wonder, just from your perspective about being in the National Women's Soccer League, how different is this conversation between the men's and the women's pro leagues? I see you smiling, so go at this.
I mean, I remember so many of my straight my straight teammates being I am never going to find anyone because everybody thinks that I'm gay because I'm on a women's sports team. You know what I mean? And it's I remember being yeah, I can see that. And, I remember in college reading all these books about higher levels of testosterone in women, which maybe that means there's more gay women in sport, and all this. And the pressure couldn't be more different, it's just, for me, you know, I have no understanding of what it's like on the men's side, just because on the women's side, it's so different. It's so accepting. It's almost like you assume everyone in the female sport world is gay, you know, until you're proven otherwise, you know, like, you know, we'll call them like the token or, you know, whatever. It's so different. Having said that, what I do really appreciate about women's sport is the allies, because they are constantly surrounded by, you know, a number of gay women. And so from that side, it's really cool to have, you know, allies that are with you every step of the way. There's, again, like I said, with John Herdman, like we've always had a really accepting culture with the national team, and most of every club that I've ever played with, it's been very accepting. You know, depending on what country that you're in, you're just a little bit more out about it than in other places. But I think in general, the women's culture is quite accepting. And I think a lot of times there is probably judgment, I would say, from the women's side. We don't have an understanding of why more men aren't coming out, but it's just something I think is so different and that we don't understand.
Wade, I want to segue to you. I want to tee up with 2 points dovetailing nicely off of what Aaron said. These are your words, Wade. The root of homophobia is sexism. Until women are free, men can never be free. Those are your words, Wade. Talk to me about all of this. And then finally, you told me this in an interview about a year ago, that in pro sports, in the Big Four, we're not looking for anyone to come out. We're actually looking for a certain type of person in particular to come out. Wade, take the stage.
Your memory's too good. I want to address something that Aaron said that's really important. That it's the seductive nature of sexism that makes people believe that if you are a woman who is good in a sport, then you must be a lesbian, right? Like that's what sexism demands, right? Sexism also demands that if you're a man playing a sport, that you must be heterosexual, right? And you cannot be gay. So like we really have to, one, like speak to the power of sexism, that it impacts both men and women's sports, and that it doesn't create the space for men specifically, right, to play in a sport and to own anything that, as I said earlier, that is proximal to the idea of what it is to be feminine, because that in itself means that you're not a man, and therefore this really this place that is the epitome of masculinity, you can't exist there, right? And the reason that I humbly believe that the root of homophobia is sexism is based on the fact that if a man shows up anything close to like a woman, then you're deemed gay, whether you are gay or not, right? And anytime that we speak of gay men, we see them through a lens of allowing another man to dominate you, and that's not what real men do, right? So the insidious nature of sexism is just so ubiquitous that we just got to spend so much time asking questions and unpacking it. And the last thing that I would say to your last point is that there is an ask that the first out gay male athlete in the Big Four is someone who is white, right? Like, I think that we need to own that, right? Is someone who is a superstar, right? Is someone who we believe will be the epitome of someone who can articulate all of these amazing things to prove to heterosexual men that we're just like them. Like, that's what the ask is amongst the LGBTQ world. The reason why we want that is because we actually believe that it's better to be heterosexual. And what I had to learn is that if there is nothing that a heterosexual man has that I want, right? Because I am very happy, as Audre Lorde says, to define myself for myself. So I am not crushed in the fantasies and the imaginations of others and eaten alive. And when I believe that, when I was in the NFL, I was crushed. I was eaten alive. But until I had to unlearn that, when I define myself for me, internally, not externally, then all of those other ideas of masculinity and toughness and femininity and weakness, that I learned that all of those things weren't true. And I began to just become more of my true self. Yeah.
Anastasia, you swim in the Olympic circles. I should say skate in the Olympic circles.
I don't swim well.
Exactly. Skate,
Like a rock.
frozen water. We've had great leaders in this space in Canada. I think of people like Marnie McBean and Mark Tewksbury. We have Sean Barber, who has come out publicly. Marcus Thormeyer came out publicly as well recently. It seems in the Olympic space, at least, that maybe it's easier to come out. Am I wrong? I don't know.
I mean, it would look that way right now, you know, just what Wade said. We haven't seen anyone in the Big Four. A few people have come out after they have retired. I think there has been great progress in the Olympic movement, and I'm very happy to see that. I mean, even just from 2014 until now, that was 6 years ago, and it's a completely different landscape, and we're having completely different conversations. But again, are we there? No. Like, we're still talking about, you know, kids dropping out, women dropping out, people that are questioning their orientation dropping out because they don't feel like sport is a safe place. And at the end of the day, there's not much else to say, but that's wrong. Like, that's a sin that kids are not playing sport or keeping in sport because they feel as though they're not safe in those spheres. Regardless if it's football or speed skating or soccer or women's hockey or badminton, I don't care what you play. I just want to ensure that we are continuously moving that conversation to show kids that sport is for everyone. And right now, it's unfortunately not.
You know, I'm thinking about this just right now as you talk about this, Anastasia, that we've come to believe that sport is this perfect meritocracy. If you can play, you can play. That the very idea of sport, the language we like to, our favorite sports, we think of, we want to believe that it's this kind, welcoming space. And so maybe starting with you, Anastasia, I wonder what your thoughts are on just the very construction of sport, the language we use, the win at all costs, the tough it out, all the sort of culture around sport, how I think as we look at it in a different way maybe than we ever have, that maybe it isn't the perfect meritocracy that everybody wants to believe it is.
No, of course not. And I'm the first one to say sport has given me everything that I could ever dream of. I'm so grateful, even in my crappy days and in the dark times. I'm so grateful that I had the privilege of skating around in a circle. But to Aaron's point, in some respects, I would argue that it is easier for women to come out as an individual athlete or a team athlete. We all, you know, worship at this altar of masculinities with an S. But I mean, is it easy for a female figure skater? No, that would be a nightmare, because we are just programmed to put people in boxes. And as much as sport is a wonderful place, it's also a very policing place. And again, we have to check ourselves, and that's hopefully what we're doing right now with conversations like this.
What do you think about it, Aaron?
I think a few things. I mean, I think I love what Wade said. Like, for me, when I was like 5 years old, I was so pissed because I wanted to be a boy, because I looked up to Wayne Gretzky. All my sport heroes were guys. And I was like, you know, I didn't want to play Foursquare or whatever the girls were doing. And I was like, I want to be a guy, you know, like, but so that was, you know, one thing. But I think also the sports culture that we're creating, like, we're having kids specialize at the age of 8. You know what I mean? Like, I played every sport. I did everything that I could. I enjoyed sport. And we've got kids burning out at 12 years old. You know what I mean? And for me, I think, you know, we've got to get down to, I mean, I remember after Donovan Bailey did his race, and he kind of said, you know, Canadians, we got to step up and not be like a participant country anymore. We got to like go gung ho. And I mean, his statement is true now. I mean, now we're like gung ho, and, you know, we've got all these private academies and sport, you know, we've got people that, you know, I was coaching for a while in West Van, and there's certain clubs where their parents are working like 3 jobs so they can afford to put their kid in soccer, which you should, you know, it should be the cheapest sport. So I think there's different pressures, and there's a lot of pressures on the kids. And I think definitely the sport culture is changing. The expectations are higher. And I think too, like the gender roles is something that I think still exists. I mean, let's be honest about Canada. We talk about being this progressive country, and how many female professional sport leagues do we have in our country? You know what I mean? So 0, you know, so we brag about that as Canadians, but we have a long way to go. And if I'm a young girl and I know that there's no pro sport team for me in my own country, it changes the way you look at sport.
Wade, if you can play, you can play. Is that really true?
It is if you're a boy, you know, like to dovetail what Aaron said, and it's just so true. Like when you talk to young boys, up to a certain age, what it means to be a boy means freedom, and it means a certain level of safety. And when you read books that are written by women about their lives as young girls, right, their life was about what they couldn't do, right? Like that they were constantly told that you could not do something, right, and to cross your legs and to cover up, right. Whereas a boy, like you not only had access to everything, you were taught that you built the entire world, right? So when we say things like culture, what we really mean is power, right? Like what group is in power that has the opportunity to create the culture inside of a sport that allows certain people to thrive and certain people not to thrive, right? You know, and you know, like when Aaron mentioned that there's 0 women's leagues in Canada, that means that the people who are in power don't see it as a necessity. They just don't, because if they did, they would change things. If they actually thought that more young girls playing sports would actually benefit boys, then they would actually shift things. Because oftentimes when what research has said is that when cities, when states, when that they can do will benefit boys, more often than not, we've made change. But what we know for sure is that there's never been a time in America's life, I can't speak for Canada, but when there was any change, whether it was for Black rights or women's rights or LGBT rights, it wasn't because of the benevolence or the goodness of the group that was in power. Things had to actually be fought for. There had to be protests. There had to be folks got arrested. So we're still in that space where our quote unquote allies still don't realize that until women are free, men can never actually be free. So we're still just resting in this status quo because it feels safe, it feels comfortable, it feels cozy, because it's nothing else, because we don't know anything else.
You know, for people who might be watching this panel and thinking that they were getting into a pride panel about athletes, ones that they've watched in the past, they're hearing this, you guys, and they might go, but this sounds like a society thing, or this sounds like the intersectionality of sexism and this issue and that. But this is what it's all about, isn't it, Wade? This is how all of these injustices and power dynamics and constructions, how they all play out in every facet of our lives.
You know, when the woman named Emma de Graffenried tried to sue a motor company on the basis of sexism and racism, and she got turned down, and the judge said to her that you have to choose, right? Like we lived in a binary world then, and we still live in a binary world now. And all of us should be really grateful for the work of Kimberly Crenshaw to create this term like intersectionality that allows us to complicate the ways that systems of power work to oppress people. And I think that if you watch a show where you think that you're going to talk about pride, and you think that you're going to talk about LGBTQ people, and you didn't think that you were going to talk about racism, classism, sexism, ableism, all these other isms, then you have to really interrogate who you actually think pride is about, right? Because if you're not thinking that it's about all of those identities, and all of those identities come together on the bodies of individuals, then my question would be is like, are you really an ally for pride folks, or are you really an ally for one type of pride person who you have in your mind? And I think that as I said earlier, the interrogation of self is probably the most important thing that a person could do. And then to answer those questions out loud, right? Like, don't keep those answers to yourself. Say, hey, you know what, when I thought about pride, I really only thought about gay men. Oh my God, and what does that say about me, right? So I think that the self-interrogation, the questioning, and the ownership is a space where anyone who is interested in showing up in the world as an ally and as an accomplice needs to start first, because far too often allies think about how can I help the other, but you got to put your mask on first, right? Like you truly have to put your mask on first and start to interrogate yourself and like answer all those really, really hard questions about you as a straight person, as a white person, as a cis person, as an able-bodied person, before you even think about wanting to advocate on behalf of someone else. And here's the last thing that I'll say. Any oppressed group does not want the dominant group's help. Because if you think that you're here to help us, then you don't see how you're implicated and how you're also hurt by it also. What we want is for you to get the barriers out of our way, and we'll take it from there, right? We will take it from there. Like it's why I despise the word empower, because it connotes that someone doesn't have power. And you only hear the word empowerment associated with women's empowerment group, right? Or African-American empowerment groups. You've never heard the term white male empowerment group, because being a white male, it's assumed that you have power. Therefore, no one can empower you. So until we stop seeing our LGBTQ people, any minority, as a person who actually needs help, then you actually haven't done the work on the self first.
We certainly don't get to pick and choose, do we? It's all in, and a lot of self-reflection. My head is spinning right now. Thank you for that, Wade. Aaron, to you, when we look at this big picture and we talk about what's at stake to wearing the mask and hearing what Wade's saying about all of these systems of power and construction, I know for myself personally, throughout my life in the broadcast world, I had so many masks and I hated myself so much. And I know now that this job and this life is a hell of a lot easier when I'm showing up fully. And it saddens me to think about how much of my life I spent hating myself and hiding parts of who I am, and how that affected how great I could be. And I think about you all as athletes. And I think about if I were to compare my career as an athletic endeavor, how much slower I would have ran or slower I would have skated based on my inauthentic way of living and my hiding and hating of myself. And so I wonder, Aaron, when you think about the cost of all of this and the humanity that we lose and the way we imagine who we are because of all of this, what you think about all of that, about this idea that as soon as we start to create these spaces for all people in the field of play to show up fully, how much greater we can achieve athletic success. It has to play a factor, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in response to the Sochi 2014, for me, that's when I came out publicly, because I thought, I just tried to put myself in those athletes' shoes who went to compete and how they had to pretend to be something that they weren't. Or, any athlete knows when you get to the finish line or when you get to that final event, you never got there by yourself. And all the people, especially your partners and the people that care for you and who really know you, have been there the whole way. And those are the people that you do it for. You do it for your teammates, you do it for everyone, but and to just be able to be authentic and to be in a space where you can have the real conversations. Because, like, let's face it, like, yeah, it's about the sport and all that, but it is also about the relationships and the connections that you build between people. And, if you're sitting beside someone who is homophobic, or if you're sitting beside someone who is racist, they don't see you. And you feel that every time that you go out and compete for them. So I think to create that space, and again, whether that's language, and I totally agree, like interrogating yourself. I had some like really, hard conversations with myself about my upbringing and about like, there's no picture perfect way of living, and there's little comments you hear in there, everywhere, and you're like, that wasn't so bad. And it's about like being honest and really looking at yourself in the mirror and being like, am I this, am I that? And but I think also to share those thoughts and feelings with other people, because then we find each other, you know what I mean? Like who we really are, and we can just break these barriers. I mean, it's crazy. We are just just totally surrounded. I had the pleasure of being in fashion for a little bit. And what it made me realize is feminine, like being feminine, being masculine, dressing like a tomboy, all these things are socially constructed. And it made me think, like, everything is socially constructed. So like, let's have the conversations where we're just getting to know who we are with all the boxes like left at the side.
We're winding down, but Aaron, I want to just get your thought. When you came out, how much of a weight, what was happening for you was lifted off? Like, what was the difference in your life? What tangible things did you feel? Relationships with people, the way you talk to people. I think we sometimes think we're out here on an island operating in our own feelings and it's big and scary. And then we come out and these people were beside us. They just were wanting us to show up and share, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, everyone kind of jokes in the 2001 tournament, I had like a mohawk, and everyone joked that like everyone in Canada knew I was gay before I did. And, so like, I'm pretty sure I was the last one to the party, but I do remember having this conversation with my mom about coming out. And she, your parents, they want to protect you. And she was like, why are you coming out? I'm like, because I want the next person to follow their heart and not think about anything else, to just love. And like, what is more important than that? I mean, if you just break it down, and it's so simple, it's just about loving someone for who they are and being loved for exactly who you are, and to have that freedom. It's, I think it's every human's right. And that's what we have to fight for at the end of the day.
Really thoughtful, Aaron. Thank you for that. Anastasia, some thoughts on this? You're on a lot of panels. You have a lot of these conversations. I know you're passionate about representation, about visibility. I grew up in Saskatoon, you in Calgary. We didn't have a lot of models of what it meant to have these, Aaron in St. Albert, Alberta, and in Calgary. I didn't think it was okay to be gay. My dad, that was a derogatory term when I was playing hockey. I quit hockey because I was afraid of being in the locker room and afraid of what that world looked like. And I didn't know I could be gay and love sport, be gay and play hockey. Representation matters. That's why we share these stories. Tell me a little bit about that, Anastasia.
I just got to a point where I was having success in my career and I was unhappy because I was not living the life that I was meant to live. And you live your dream in the pursuit of it, not when you reach it. And so I thought to myself, if I win an Olympic gold medal or if I break a world record, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where I end up if I am hating myself on this journey. And I know so many athletes who have had such success that are not, this is from Cool Runnings, great movie, but if you're not enough without a gold medal, you're never going to be enough with a gold medal. And that's as simple as it is. Like, sport is such a wonderful vehicle for self-exploration and learning to love yourself and learning how to, everything we celebrate with sports. But your relationship with yourself dictates every other relationship you have with everyone else in the world. So you got to get good with yourself. And it's scary and it's tough because sport is policed. But I mean, it was honestly, it was an easy decision for me because I knew it didn't matter where I ended up. If I was going to continue the way that I was, it was just so all-encompassing and lonely and confusing, and the anxiety that crept into depression. It just wasn't worth it. Skating around in a circle wasn't worth it if I wasn't going to do it with me showing up for who I am.
Powerful, Anastasia. Let me leave you with this last thought, and then we'll go from Anastasia to Aaron to Wade. I've done a lot of reporting around this in the midst of the pandemic. In what somebody said, we want our athletes to be almost as if they're dead, to not have thoughts, to just go out there, shut up, and play. In 1968, we saw Tommy Smith and John Carlos put the Black Power fist on top of the podium at the 68 Olympics. Then you can go all the way to the way the Kaepernick situation was handled. It's easy to, years removed, say you were supportive, but when these people needed it most, not a lot of people stood by them. So to this idea where we have you three on this panel who have thoughts about this, but maybe couldn't find your voice in the midst of all of it, how important is it going to be for athletes to use their privileged platform in all of these issues we've talked about in this panel to push the agenda? We turned to athletics to signal how serious this pandemic was. Now we're hearing all of these athletes talk about these issues. How important is your voice and every athlete's voice to use their platform in all of this as we move forward? Anastasia, I'll let you take it away.
I've said it once, I'll say it again. Sport is a mirror to society, and sometimes it's a magnifying glass. And I believe that the IOC needs to absolutely figure Rule 50 out, because they're going to be on the wrong side of history. And everything that we celebrate about sport is a direct reflection of society and progress and where we need to go to make individuals better, to make societies better, to make this world better, to make history better when we look back in 20 years. So I can't state enough how important that athlete voice is. And sport is such a wonderful thing that unites us, and it allows us to have conversations that are really difficult.
Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I've heard a lot of people say, 2020 is a wash and all this stuff, but I actually think it might be probably the most important year we've had in my life so far. And I think a lot of stuff is shut down. A lot of sports is not happening. Everything's kind of put on pause, but it's a good time to look at the infrastructure. It's a good time to look at the systems. It's the behind the scenes stuff that needs to change from the top down. So I think absolutely, like, athletes have so much power, especially with, the social media world is the news world, like the followers, they're in the spotlight. And I know, a lot of times when it comes down to especially LGBT, there's a lot of very intimate personal decisions there. So I would never say, come out or, express yourself or whatever. But I would say that, if the timing is right, I would love, we don't know enough about the transgender community. We are not giving enough support. And this is the time to, again, I love what Wade, you've been saying, reflect, what can you do, learn about yourself, and then start helping people in your community.
And Wade, last word to you.
I was thinking about your question, and I think it comes back to the idea that people know that athletes are models and symbols, right? And that if we get athletes to shut up and dribble, then those who are in power get to stay in power and maintain the status quo. But I think that what we're witnessing are that athletes younger and younger are stepping into their understanding that they have power, and they're going to continue to fracture the culture of sports. And at some point, either we will have sports that are much more equal and equitable for everyone, or in some places we won't have sports anymore. And I think that that's the question that a lot of us have to answer. So to dovetail Anastasia's comment, sports made me so many things, but it also taught me to be unafraid. And I'm learning how to step into my own power. And I think that other athletes are stepping into their own power much, much sooner. And I think that that's really what the status quo folks are afraid of.
I'm motivated and inspired by you three, humbled to be alongside of you. I've learned a lot. Maya Angelou said, when we know better, we do better, right? And so we've learned a lot here. Anastasia Bustos, Aaron McLeod, Wade Davis, really and truly grateful for all three of you. And to every one of you who have watched us, happy Pride and a real chance for reflection within all of this. Thanks for watching.